What would you do if your HOA tried to ban Halloween decorations because they didn't match the neighborhood aesthetic? Or if they forced a local cafe to stop serving coffee to cops because they thought law enforcement was too intimidating for the community? Welcome to Maplewood, the kind of town where everything looks picture-perfect on the surface. The lawns are neatly trimmed, the houses could be straight out of a suburban lifestyle magazine, and the biggest scandal, at least to outsiders, seems to be a neighbor forgetting to bring in their trash bins on time. But beneath that carefully maintained illusion of peace and order, there exists a different kind of authority. Not the police, not the mayor, but a group far more ruthless. The self-proclaimed rulers of Maplewood, the Karen Coalition. Officer Ethan Walker hadn't expected much when he transferred here. After years of dealing with high-speed chases and violent crime in the city, a quiet suburban patrol seemed like a well-earned break. Maybe he'd write a few speeding tickets, help lost pets find their way home, and deal with the occasional noise complaint from a rowdy backyard barbecue. But he was wrong. Very, very wrong. Because in Maplewood, the real trouble didn't come from criminals, it came wrapped in pastel cardigans and oversized sunglasses. The Karen Coalition operated under the guise of the Homeowners Association, HOA, but had long since abandoned its original purpose. Instead of maintaining property values and enforcing reasonable community guidelines, it had evolved into a petty dictatorship, with one simple goal: absolute control. And at the head of it all was Patricia Whitmore, a woman who carried herself with the unshakable confidence of a corporate CEO. If that CEO's empire consisted solely of HOA meetings, neighborhood Facebook drama, and an endless supply of legal threats. Patricia had an opinion about everything, and in her mind, her word was law. If she didn't like the color of your front door, she'd have it repainted. If she decided a kid's lemonade stand was an eyesore, she'd shut it down. And if a police officer dared to enforce laws that didn't align with her personal agenda, well, she'd do everything in her power to make his life a living hell. Ethan had dealt with entitled people before, but nothing quite like this. Because Patricia wasn't alone. She had an entire council of chaos backing her up. There was Linda Harrington, the self-appointed neighborhood journalist, who never went anywhere without her phone camera rolling, ready to scream, "I'm recording this," at the slightest inconvenience. Then there was Debbie Simmons, the queen of gossip, who could take the most mundane event, like a jogger stopping to tie their shoe, and spin it into a full-blown conspiracy. And finally, Susan Caldwell, their so-called legal expert, who got all her knowledge from clickbait articles and Facebook comment threads but spoke with the authority of a Supreme Court justice. For months, Ethan had tried to stay patient. He had tried reasoning with them. But Patricia and her crew weren't the type to back down quietly. And lately, their antics had escalated from annoying to downright dangerous. They were interfering with police matters, harassing innocent people, and now, they were plotting something bigger. Ethan didn't know exactly what Patricia's next move was, but he had a bad feeling about it. Because in Maplewood, the biggest threat wasn't crime. It was Karen with a vendetta. Officer Ethan Walker knew Maplewood wasn't normal, but even he wasn't prepared for the lengths the Karen Coalition would go to just to get rid of him. It started with their usual complaints, claims that he was harassing law-abiding citizens just for enforcing traffic laws, or that he was targeting them whenever he wrote a ticket. But when Patricia Whitmore realized whining on Facebook wasn't enough to get him fired, she took things a step further. First came the petitions. Printed on expensive cardstock with dramatic language about overreach and abuse of power, Patricia paraded them through every HOA meeting, demanding that Ethan be removed from his position. When that didn't work, she organized what she called a community safety initiative, which, in reality, was just a campaign to make Maplewood as hostile as possible for law enforcement. And her first move? Banning all businesses from serving police officers. It was a slow-rolling disaster. At first, Ethan didn't notice anything unusual. He made his usual morning stop at Maple Perk Cafe, a small coffee shop owned by an older couple who had been running the place for over 2 decades. He greeted the cashier, reached for his wallet, and then, hesitation. The young barista looked nervous, her eyes darting toward the back, where the owner, Mrs. Martinez, stood with her arms crossed, lips pressed into a tight line. I'm sorry, Officer Walker, the barista stammered, voice barely above a whisper. We can't serve you anymore. Ethan frowned. What? Mrs. Martinez let out a sigh and walked up to the counter, lowering her voice. It's the HOA. Patricia sent out a notice saying any business that serves police officers will be reviewed for compliance. She looked genuinely ashamed. They can't legally do anything, but they've been harassing small businesses with inspections, zoning complaints, anything they can use to make our lives hell. Ethan clenched his jaw. This wasn't just petty revenge anymore. Patricia was actively weaponizing the HOA to punish anyone who didn't support her absurd crusade. And it was working. Within days, the effects spread across Maplewood. A family-owned diner that had once provided free coffee to officers was suddenly flooded with anonymous noise complaints. A bakery was slapped with a surprise health and safety audit after refusing to participate in the ban. One shop owner, an elderly man who had been running his hardware store for 40 years, was served with a warning about violations of community business standards after he was seen chatting with an officer outside his store. Ethan tried to ignore it, tried not to let it get to him. But then he saw Patricia's latest Facebook post, and his patience snapped. A live video, Patricia's smug face front and center, standing in front of Maple Perk Cafe. The caption read, "We did it. Maplewood is officially a police-free zone." Behind her, a handful of Karen supporters clapped as she spoke into the camera, voice dripping with self-importance. "This is a victory for our community. No longer will we be intimidated by unnecessary police presence. We, the citizens of Maplewood, are reclaiming our neighborhood." Ethan wasn't even angry at this point, he was disgusted. She was treating this like some kind of revolution, as if she had liberated the town from tyranny instead of making life harder for the very people keeping it safe. And the worst part? Some residents actually believed her. But Ethan wasn't going to let Patricia and her army of Karens run unchecked. They wanted to push him out? Fine. He wasn't going anywhere. If anything, Patricia had just made a very big mistake, because Ethan Walker had just decided that it was time to push back. Ethan Walker had dealt with plenty of entitled nonsense since arriving in Maplewood, but nothing compared to what happened when a real crime finally occurred. Up until now, the Karen coalition had been nothing more than a nuisance, disrupting his patrols, filing absurd complaints, and turning the HOA into their own personal empire. But when an actual crime spree hit the town, they didn't just get in the way. They actively made things worse. It started with a series of home burglaries. Late at night, while most of Maplewood was asleep, someone was breaking into houses, picking locks with an unsettling level of skill and vanishing before anyone could catch them. The target seemed random at first, an elderly couple's home on Maple Drive, a young family's house near the park, a lawyer's property in a gated section of the neighborhood. But after the third break-in, Ethan noticed a pattern. Each house belonged to residents who had publicly opposed the Karen coalition. He didn't believe in coincidences. Ethan and his team launched a full investigation, gathering security footage, interviewing residents, and increasing patrols at night. Then, just when they were making progress, Linda Harrington showed up with her damn phone camera. Ethan had just finished collecting statements from the latest victim when he heard it, the unmistakable, shrill voice of Linda shouting, "I'm recording this." He turned to see her standing on the sidewalk, phone raised, narrating the entire scene like a news anchor. "The corrupt police force of Maplewood is harassing innocent homeowners instead of focusing on real issues," she announced, panning her camera dramatically. "Officer Walker is leading a politically motivated investigation, targeting members of our community who have dared to stand up for their rights. Ethan clenched his jaw. Linda, this is an active crime scene. Step back. Linda zoomed in on his face. Oh, so now I'm a criminal? Are you threatening me, Officer Walker? I'm telling you to stop interfering before you compromise evidence. But it was too late. The victim, a man in his 50s, had been about to share a crucial detail about a suspicious car seen in the area. Now, with Linda filming, he hesitated. He didn't want to become the next target of a Karen smear campaign. He shook his head, muttered something about not wanting trouble, and shut his door. Ethan turned back to Linda, his patience running on fumes. You just scared off a witness. Linda smirked. Or maybe he didn't trust you. By the time Ethan made it back to the station, the damage was already done. Linda had uploaded her video online, where it quickly spread among HOA supporters. Within hours, the investigation was being painted as a personal vendetta against Patricia's followers. Debbie Simmons, the queen of gossip, took it even further. You know what I heard, she whispered to a group of HOA members in a local salon. I heard Officer Walker is faking the break-ins to make us look bad. Think about it. Only people who went against the HOA are being robbed? Suspicious, isn't it? By the next morning, the rumor had mutated into something even dumber. People were now accusing Ethan of staging the burglaries himself. When the real burglar was finally caught, thanks to actual police work, not HOA conspiracy theories, Patricia still found a way to twist the narrative. She held a press conference, or at least, she stood on her lawn with a microphone while Linda live-streamed, and announced that the Karen Coalition had been the real heroes all along. If it weren't for our vigilance, Patricia declared, who knows how many more homes would have been violated. We, the people, are the true protectors of Maplewood. Ethan watched from his squad car, gripping the steering wheel so tightly his knuckles turned white. It didn't matter that she had done absolutely nothing to help. It didn't matter that her group had actively sabotaged the investigation. Somehow, she was taking credit. And worst of all, some people actually believed her. The break-in fiasco should have been a wake-up call for Patricia Whitmore. Any rational person would have taken the hint, laid low, and avoided further embarrassment. But Patricia wasn't rational. In her mind, she wasn't the problem, Ethan Walker was. And she was determined to make sure the entire town saw it that way. It started with a lawsuit. Patricia, in all her misguided fury, had gathered a legal team, aka Susan Caldwell, the Facebook legal expert, and drafted a cease and desist order demanding that Ethan stand down from his duties. Her claim? That he was harassing law-abiding citizens, suppressing free speech, and abusing his authority. The document was little more than a collection of copied and pasted legal jargon, half of which didn't even apply to law enforcement. Ethan barely had time to glance at it before the police chief tossed it straight into the shredder. That should have been the end of it. But Patricia wasn't done. When her lawsuit was ignored, she escalated to full-blown protest mode. The first sign that something ridiculous was about to happen came when Ethan arrived for his morning patrol and found the entire police station surrounded. Patricia had organized a Justice for Maplewood demonstration, and dozens of Karen Coalition members had gathered, holding up signs with slogans like "Defund the Karen haters," "Abolish traffic laws," "Justice for HOA." At the front of the crowd, standing atop a folding chair with a megaphone in hand, was Patricia. "The police work for us," she screeched into the megaphone, voice dripping with righteous indignation. "They answer to us. And we will not be silenced by government tyranny." Ethan watched from the doorway, sipping his coffee, waiting for whatever absurd stunt Patricia had planned next. He didn't have to wait long. Linda was live-streaming the whole thing, narrating in dramatic tones. Right now, Maplewood's finest citizens are standing up against oppression. Look at the bravery. Look at the strength. She zoomed in on Debbie, who was fake crying into a tissue. These women have suffered under the abusive power of Officer Ethan Walker. Ethan rolled his eyes. Abusive power? The worst thing he'd done was write a few parking tickets and ask Linda to step back from an active crime scene. Then, Patricia made her boldest move yet. "We will not leave until our demands are met," she declared, throwing an official-looking stack of papers onto the police station steps. "I have here a formal motion to remove Officer Walker from duty. Signed by the people of Maplewood." Ethan picked up the papers and skimmed them. A petition. A petition with 25 signatures. In a town of nearly 10,000. He snorted. "That's cute." Patricia gasped, scandalized. "Did you hear that?" she shouted into the megaphone. "He mocks the voice of the people." The crowd gasped in unison. Linda spun her camera around, whispering, "This is what we're dealing with, people. Corruption at its finest." Ethan pinched the bridge of his nose. "Patricia. You're trespassing. You and your," he gestured vaguely at the group, "followers need to clear out. We have the right to be here." Patricia shrieked. "You don't have the right to block a government building after midnight. We are staging a peaceful protest." Ethan nodded to his fellow officers. "All right, start clearing them out." The reaction was instantaneous chaos. Patricia threw herself onto the ground, wailing. Debbie screamed. Susan clutched her clipboard like it was a shield against tyranny. Linda zoomed in dramatically on Patricia's brutal takedown, which, to be clear, involved zero force and a lot of unnecessary flailing. And then, in what was possibly the dumbest move of her entire career, Patricia lunged forward and grabbed Ethan's badge. Everything stopped. Linda gasped. Debbie shrieked. Susan whispered, "Oh my God." Ethan tilted his head. "Did you just attack a police officer?" Patricia blinked, as if the realization had just hit her. "Oh." Before she could finish, Ethan cuffed her on the spot. The crowd erupted into screams. Linda kept rolling. "Oh my God, you're seeing this live. They're taking Patricia." Debbie wailed, "They can't do this. She's a taxpayer." Patricia, however, wasn't wailing. She was snarling. Eyes narrowed, jaw clenched, voice venomous. "This isn't over," she hissed as Ethan led her toward the squad car. Ethan chuckled. "Oh, I really hope it is." But deep down, he knew better. Karen wasn't done yet. Patricia Whitmore spent the night in a holding cell, pacing furiously, no doubt planning her next move. By morning, her lawyer, who looked like he deeply regretted taking her case, managed to negotiate bail. She walked out of the station with her head held high, flanked by Linda and Debbie, who greeted her like a war hero returning from battle. Linda was already live streaming. The day Maplewood fell to tyranny, she whispered dramatically, panning the camera toward Patricia, whose mugshot was now public record. Within hours, it had become a meme. By the end of the week, high school kids were printing it on t-shirts. But the real consequences came fast. The HOA board, fed up with Patricia's antics, held an emergency vote. For years, she had ruled with an iron fist, bullying neighbors, threatening lawsuits over mailbox colors, and turning minor disagreements into full-blown scandals. But her attempt to overthrow the police? That was the final straw. The board voted unanimously to ban Patricia from all HOA meetings, decision-making, and leadership roles. When she tried to argue, Mr. Thompson, the HOA president, simply adjusted his glasses and said, "No, Patricia. This is called consequences." The next blow came in court. The judge barely glanced at her defense, a binder full of Facebook legal theories, before handing down her sentence, 200 hours of community service, a hefty fine, and a restraining order preventing her from interfering with police matters. Patricia was speechless. Linda sobbed. Debbie fainted. And then, just when Maplewood thought it was free of Patricia for good, she pulled one last stunt. She disappeared. For weeks, nobody saw her. Then, one morning, Ethan received a text from an officer in the next town over. It was a photo of Patricia, handcuffed, again, along with the message, "Is this one of yours? She just tried to fire our sheriff." Ethan laughed for a solid 5 minutes. Maplewood was finally at peace. The HOA functioned normally for the first time in years. Linda quietly went back to making Facebook cooking videos, Debbie moved on to a new scandal, and Susan, who had never been fully on board, faded into the background. But Ethan knew the truth. Somewhere, somehow, another Karen was plotting her next act of entitlement. Have you ever felt powerless against HOA or Karen rules? Share your experiences below, let's see who had it worse.